Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Are we good? It says it's streaming. No?
Um,
It says it's streaming. We're live on Facebook. Yeah?
okay.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Center for Justice and Law Constitution Day event on the community responses to the 2020 Supreme Court decisions. We're really excited to be here with a stellar panel. We want to begin with a land acknowledgement. I want to take a moment to state we are on stolen land. Our panelist, Anne, shared with me recently the agreed upon land acknowledgement of all 11 tribes in Minnesota through MIAC. I'm standing on traditional and ancestral Dakota land, and I want to take this opportunity and every opportunity moving forward to acknowledge the colonial and genocidal histories that are woven into this land. The founding of institutions such as Homeland came at a dire cost to the Dakota people. The Dakota were forced to cede their lands in return for goods and services, but the government did not uphold the terms of these treaties, leading to widespread devastation. We recognize this painful past, and we honor Dakota people's history on this land, their sovereignty, and their continued contributions to our region. Minnesota comes from the Dakota name for this region, Minnesota Makoke, the land where the waters reflect the skies. The Dakota and numerous other indigenous peoples whose cultural, spiritual, and economic practices are intrinsically woven into this landscape hold this land sacred. We recognize them as original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it who had thriving and vibrant communities prior to disruptions by settlers. Today, the state of Minnesota shares geography with 11 tribal nations. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm tribal sovereignty and hold Homeland and the Center for Justice and Law accountable to recognize and counter their historical and contemporary injustices that continue to impact Indigenous people through mutually beneficial partnerships, research, policies, and practices that respect indigeneity. I'm Professor Susie Keefe, and I am here as the director for the Center for Justice and Law at Homeland. The mission of the Center for Justice and Law is to develop creative, concrete, and equitable solutions to legal issues and policy concerns through teaching, research, and active collaboration with community partners and policymakers. This year, with the emergence of COVID-19 and an international movement for racial justice, we recognize this moment calls for a radical reckoning of the depths of inequality in this country and across the world. In service to this, we aim to center all of our events this year around the following three commitments: employing an anti-racist lens, including our choice of speakers, content, branding, and facilitation; centering community members as experts in identifying and designing solutions to policy and legal challenges; and bridging the gap between theory and practice. Our theme this year is health, justice, and the law. Efforts to improve health among the most impacted by health inequities and disparities are impeded by inequitable social structures, racism, legal systems, and regulatory schemes that are ill-fitted to take into account the social determinants of health in decision-making models and legal interpretation. The social and legal roots of poor health and how health inequity, social justice, and poverty are inextricably linked are the foundation of our programming this year. Today, we're going to be discussing the Supreme Court decisions from this summer on some of the most important and consequential cases we've seen in decades, including rulings on birth control, abortion, religion, indigenous land, LGBTQ+, and immigration. These rulings impact social equity in our nation. This year on Constitution Day, we at the CJL have decided to highlight how these rulings impact those who have been excluded from our Constitution. The cases we're spotlighting include the Department of Homeland Security versus Regents of the University of California. This decision restores the program completely, and initial and renewal applications should be accepted by USCIS. The second is Little Sisters of the Poor Saints Peter and Paul Home versus Pennsylvania, which allows employers and universities to opt out of the ACA requirement to provide contraceptive care because of religious or moral objections. Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia. This ruling protects LGBTQ employees from firing and other adverse employment decisions made on the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And finally, McGirt versus Oklahoma. This decided that Congress has never extinguished the reservation land set aside for the Muskogee Creek Nation in 1866. So the 19 million acres, or 47% of Oklahoma and 1.8 million people, is still native land, and the state is unauthorized to prosecute crimes on their land. Only the federal government can. So our structure for today, we have 4 wonderful panelists, and I have a series of questions I'm going to ask each panelist, and they will get to respond. For the last portion, we'll open it up to the audience and ask any questions that you may have. We have student coordinators moderating the Facebook chat live for questions from the audience, as well as panelists who would like to offer questions. I'll introduce our panelists and then we'll go ahead and get started. So first of all, we have Anne Garagiola-Bernier, she, her, from the Boy Forte Band of Chippewa. Anne is an alum of Hamline University 2019 and in her second year of a Master's of Public Policy at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. She's a teaching assistant in the American Indian Studies Department at the University of Minnesota. Anne is currently interning with the Tribal Sovereignty Institute in her role at the university and is dedicated to increasing the representation of Indigenous students in higher ed and making college a more equitable experience. In recognition of her work combining food sovereignty theories with community organizing to ameliorate campus food insecurity, Anne has numerous awards, including Campus Compact Newman Civic Fellow, a Roz Widgway Forum Fellow, and an inaugural recipient of the Undergraduate Scholar Award in honor of Dennis Belcher. Off campus, Anne is a mother of 3 and works as a motivational speaker and mentor for students. Welcome, Anne. Next, we have Kathy Santamaria Mendez, pronouns she, her. Kathy is a Salvadoran, Honduran, Central American immigrant who grew up in the Twin Cities. She attended her first immigrant rights protest in 2006 during a nationwide uprising against anti-immigration legislation that was being proposed in Congress. Since then, she has continued standing up using her own lived experiences as an immigrant. During high school, she also became a teen mom at 15, which pushed her even further to continue doing her advocacy work, but from a broader lens. In May 2019, she graduated from the University of Minnesota in Chicano Latino Studies. During her time as an undergrad, she did various internships such as the Capital Pathways internships and the Urban Scholar Internship Program. She was also appointed as a member of the Young Women's Initiative of Minnesota. She is currently involved in the Minnesota Immigration Rights Action Committee, where she has volunteered in DACA renewal clinics, as well as working on legislative and community work for a Clean Dream Act. Currently, she is a first-year law student at Mitchell-Hammond. She hopes to eventually use her law degree to do work with the intersections that exist in criminal law and immigration law. Welcome, Kathy. Next is Sophia Warrick, she, her. Sophie is a creative activist dedicated to providing social change through the arts by creating and uplifting communities with an emphasis in storytelling. On campus, she is the president of the Hamline Students for Reproductive Justice and is an intern with Planned Parenthood. She is currently studying music, social justice, nonprofit management, and digital media arts at Hamline. Welcome, Sophie. And finally, we have Andrew Weston, ZZM. Andrew is an offbeat radical organizer based in the Twin Cities. Originally from Minneapolis, Z currently works in Richfield and goes to school in St. Paul, all 3 of which lie on the traditional territory of the Wapakute and Anishinaabe peoples. Andrew is currently a senior at Hamline, pursuing a Bachelor of Arts in Social Justice with minors in Spanish and Legal Studies. In 2019, Z co-founded Transgender, Intersex, Gender Expansive, Revolutionary Resources and Services, otherwise known as Tigers, which focuses on serving young people in their community. Z has been doing direct work, service work with trans, intersex, gender expansive, and queer communities since 2015, and is determined to continue serving as our community for years to come. Welcome, Andrew. It's great to have this amazing lineup of activists and experts here with us today. We've asked them here because they've all have personal and professional connections to these decisions by the Supreme Court this summer. And so we want to hear from them about how their community has been impacted by the recent Supreme Court decisions. So I'm going to hand it to Anne first, if that's okay. And if you want to just give us a sense of how you and your community have experienced this recent Supreme Court decision, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Susie. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's quite an honor. So I'm not part of the Muskogee and Creek Nation, but as a person who identifies as Indigenous, and I know that many other Native peoples see this as kind of a groundbreaking decision that upholds tribal sovereignty. I'm not going to pretend to know a lot about the law. My Boston professor, Tad Johnson, who is a brilliant tribal law expert and one of the nicest people I've ever met, is a fierce advocate of tribal sovereignty, and I'm honored to learn from him. But tribal law is complex, right? I know the fundamentals of the case, the decision, and what that means at word value. But in action, I'm not sure, right? This doesn't mean necessarily land back, right? They're not going to just hand over all of Eastern Oklahoma back to the Muskogee and Creek Nations. Most of that land is privately held, but what it does mean from a federal Indian policy and jurisdictional perspective is that the federal government now has control over major crimes investigations and prosecution in what was considered Eastern Oklahoma. So I would imagine that a lot of people right now are reviewing their treaties to see if they are in a similar situation. And then there's also, I think, roughly about 1,800 criminal cases that are within statutory guidelines that may be able to be retried at a federal level.
All right, thank you. That's a great sort of starting point. Kathy, do you want to go next?
Yeah. So thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'm very honored to be here. And I just want to be clear that I'm currently not a DACA recipient, so I'm not speaking on my own personal impact on this policy. But as a former undocumented immigrant, I can relate in many aspects to the struggles that DACA recipients go through. But I'm here as an immigrant who believes that it is my right to continue fighting for the community, because I'm not free until my community is free, and I still consider the undocumented community as my community. So I'm committed to fighting in the struggle with them until we are all free. So the case we are talking about is the DACA decision that came this past spring, which I also want to be clear that this decision doesn't mean that the program itself is constitutional, but rather that the way in which the Department of Homeland Security went about rescinding the program was a violation of the Administrative Procedure Act, which an overview is that, so DACA is an executive order. It is not a legislative law, meaning that, it can be ended by the president, but the way in which the Department of Homeland Security went about ending it was wrong. So under the Administrative Procedure Act, in summary, I don't want to give you all a law lesson, but in summary, it's the Department of Homeland Security was supposed to give the public at least 30 days notice and allow them to submit feedback on this process. However, the Department of Homeland Security, what they did was they immediately wanted to end DACA. And if you know the process of DACA recipients gave the Department of Homeland Security access to very personal information, such as social security numbers, their names, birth certificates, very confidential information that now the Department of Homeland Security has access to. And obviously, this gives them access to potentially deport DACA recipients once they are deemed not protected for deportation, which essentially is what DACA is doing for its recipients. It's giving them protection from deportation, as well as allowing them to work, have a driver's license, go to school, all these different things that sometimes we take for granted, but for DACA recipients, it's been life-changing, having access to a social security number and all of these different things. So with this decision, the Department of Homeland Security still is able to return to the Supreme Court with stronger arguments to end DACA. So this isn't a permanent solution, and it's not the ideal solution we want for DACA recipients. The ideal situation would be that a Clean Dream Act is passed in Congress, which will give DACA recipients a pathway to citizenship without using them as a bargaining tool for a border wall or for all of these different funding for border control for all these different things, right? Like, we want a Clean Dream Act that does not use DACA recipients, because they are humans, they are not tools that should be used to negotiate these policies. So that's essentially a breakdown of what this decision was and sort of the future of the decision, basically.
Thank you, Kathy. I really appreciate that the two of you sort of right off the bat are sort of saying like, this is not a permanent fix. This is a moment. And there's still a lot of work to be done. And there are still people who need this work to be done. So I appreciate that you're both sort of starting us off there. Thank you. Andrew, would you like to go next?
Yes, definitely. I'm also really excited and honored to be here with you all. The case I'm focusing on is Bostock versus Clayton County, which is a case that I've been following since it got into the Supreme Court. So I was really excited to talk about this because I'm overall really excited about it. And essentially, it kind of is a permanent fix in a lot of ways, unlike Anne's and Kathy's cases, in that it gives a federal definition for what sex discrimination is, and that it includes, federally speaking, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. So the case itself is regarding employment discrimination. So in one of the cases, so it's a combined case of a couple different cases that were heard by the Supreme Court. And one of them, an employee in Clayton County, Georgia, was fired for behavior unbecoming of a county employee because he joined a gay softball league. And then in another case, which I was following a lot more closely, listening to the oral arguments, was Harris Funeral Homes versus the EEOC, in which a transgender woman who was a funeral home director or an employee at a funeral home was fired after she came out as transgender and said that I will start dressing as my gender identity and I will express my gender in this way. And so she was fired because she wore a dress to work. And so it was within the female dress code given by the employers. And so in a combination judgment, it essentially says that you cannot fire people or give adverse employment results to people based on their gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. And so that's it's really big, I think, in a lot of ways. When this decision was released, it wasn't really talked about and it wasn't really noticed. And so I don't really know actually how many people are aware of this, but it's a really, really huge thing in that it also then extends the definition of what sex discrimination is to every other federal law that prohibits against it. So it's not just trans people and other LGBTQIA+ people can't be fired from their jobs. It's also you can't be discriminated against at a homeless shelter or at your doctor's office or in all these areas of our lives that are really meaningful for what outcomes we have. And so it was I was floored, honestly, because it really could have gone either way with people saying that no, sex is based on your genitalia, or sex is everything that encompasses you and your role in this world. And so it was just something really, really cool for me. And so the only thing that would be more permanent than this would be in a constitutional amendment that prohibits sex-based discrimination and defines it. But we've been working for that ERA since the 1970s. I'm assuming people will keep working for it, but so far that's not super successful. So for me, this kind of almost is like the end of the line in that we are safe, we are protected, and by any federal law that exists prohibiting sex discrimination. So it's not that the Constitution says we can't be discriminated against, it's that if you want to prohibit against sex discrimination, you're also prohibiting against gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation-based discrimination. So I guess that's like a quickish summary of the case. And I think it's really, really impactful for not just LGBTQIA+ people, but people all over the board, across the board. It's like if I was saying that I had a small business and I really just don't like cis men, I don't want them working for me. I could fire them prior to this decision. I could fire them because they were cisgender men. And a lot of times people think, oh, well, what, you can't do that. Cis men have power, they have privilege, you can't discriminate against them. But the law says that I could until the law says that you can't. And so for me, this protects us all, no matter what, how marginalized our gender identity, how marginalized our sexual orientation is, we are protected and we are safe. And so it's just very cool for me. And yeah, that's Bostock versus Clayton County.
Thank you, Andrew. I love how you framed that at the end there, that we all benefit from that decision, it's a really great distinction. Sophie, why don't you go next and let us know how the Supreme Court decision sort of has been playing out for you in the work you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. So hi, I'm Sophie. My pronouns are she, her. I'm also very, very honored to be here in community with you all virtually and all over the place. But yeah, so the Supreme Court case that I'm going to talk about involves Little Sisters of the Poor. And basically, it's kind of like a letdown after Andrew's like really great kind of like hurrah moment. Like my case is like not that exciting or happy, but basically, the decision of my case basically turned out to be that under the Affordable Care Act, employers are able to, or basically any non-governmental employer can request an exemption from providing contraception based on either moral or like religious objections. And so basically, if you have a case for why you don't want to provide contraception, like you have an opportunity to, as long as it's within like a moral or like right? But like what's morals, like anybody, you know, the whole thing. But basically, it makes my heart hurt like a lot because the people who have benefited most from like guaranteed birth control under insurance are people of color, are LGBTQIA plus folks. They are like low wage workers, and then especially like young people, right? And so to see that taken away, and then also to see a precedent kind of form through this case that like more stuff can be taken away. Like we could like continue to create exemptions that provide like affordable healthcare to people, like from a variety of like different identities, like just because your employer says so. And so it really just kind of, I don't know, in the middle of summer was kind of a big downer, like to say the least, because like as a young person, as a queer person, as a person that has a uterus that like benefits from a lot of like contraceptions and things like that, right? Like it's kind of just kind of a, I don't know, a kick in the shin like type of a thing, quite honestly. But yeah, like, and the other thing that I like really kind of think about with this case in particular is that like this decision like isn't accidental, that it impacts like people of color, LGBTQIA plus folks, like low income folks and young people. Like it's another part of like the network of oppressive tactics that kind of like reinforce like capitalism, white supremacy, like except blah, 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 blah. And so I guess that's like the other end of it. That's just, it's not accidental, it's on purpose. So yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. I was anticipating that's why I sort of bookended your case at the end. Really, I think Kathy's point that all of these sort of represent a good moment, but that there is still much work to be done. And Anne referencing all of the tribes that can maybe contest previous decisions, or who are all revisiting and looking at the situations that these aren't really final. I think oftentimes people have a relationship to sort of what is decided at the Supreme Court and don't fully understand that broader context. And I agree with you. When that decision happened, it felt like a huge sort of knife in the heart, sort of thinking about that these things continue, this work isn't done. So I appreciate that. What I'm wondering maybe next is if you all want to talk about sort of what you've been doing since these decisions happened, right? So something that you've been working on this summer, or that you want people to know about in terms of the advocacy and activism that you're doing around this work. Anne, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks. So my work didn't necessarily directly interact with the law. as I mentioned earlier, I'm interning with the Tribal Sovereignty Institute. And so through that work, I was part of a team that was able to research the history of the University of Minnesota's relationship with the tribal nations, and work on behalf of the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council to kind of supply the research background for some resolutions, that they put out at the end of August to hold the University of Minnesota accountable for being a land grab institution. So if we think about that, so today we're gathered for this so-called Constitution Day event, but in the Constitution, American Indians are referred to as merciless Indian savages. The Constitution was written as a way to justify the genocide against indigenous peoples that originally inhabited this land. And so that was done, right, to actively erase Native existence, Native knowledge, and existing forms of government. The Constitution, I guess, is supposed to be the supreme law of the land. And it says, you know, in there, it gives supreme law also to the treaties that were made with American Indian tribes. So there's over 370 treaties, and not one of them have been kept. So if the Supreme Court is kind of upholding treaty rights in this McGirt case, why not other cases, right? So that was part of it. So when we think about, I guess, the history of Minnesota Makoche and the history of how this state was formed, how the university was formed, and, you know, even how Hamlin was formed, right? Hamlin was founded in 1854. It is a territorial institution. It was founded before the colonial state of Minnesota existed, just like the University of Minnesota. And so these institutions kind of owe their existence to the demise and exile of Dakota people and Ho-Chunk people in Minnesota Makoche. And in fact, Hamlin was built to encourage white settlement in this area. But I'll touch on finally, so there's a lot of history between the 11 tribal nations that occupy this region and the universities that also occupy this region. And in that relationship, Native bodies have never been respected. So one resolution that was put out by MIAC refers to the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act. And this is another example of legislation that was never truly enforced. So right now, the University of Minnesota is refusing to repatriate 129 Pueblo ancestors, which they are claiming ownership of, along with 2,500 funerary objects, which are being held by the Wiseman Art Museum. The bodies of these ancestors are kind of being held at Hamlin, right? So the very place that is, you know, that we're doing this panel for. So, you know, all of these institutions are accomplices still to this day, and still profiting and still claiming profits off of stolen Native bodies, stolen Native property, stolen Native lands.
Thank you, Anne. I really, I think we all appreciate how serious this is and that this continues to happen. And I think it's it's super important that we don't just put this in sort of some historical past. This all continues to happen, right? And I especially appreciate the way in which you sort of talk about bodies, right? And I think actually every single one of these cases really, it's not just about disrespecting an idea or concept, but it's that embodied experience, right? That when you're sort of referencing that it's the Constitution that is doing this, but it is so much more than that. So yeah, thank you for bringing us there, and I was really glad you highlight even the institution that is indirectly or directly hosting this event, right? I mean, we have to be willing to acknowledge and point out those things. So thank you. All right, Anne or Kathy, do you want to share with us a little bit about the work you've been doing this summer and what you want people to know about the work in the community that you're working with?
Yeah, so this summer I got involved with MIRAC, which is the Minnesota Immigrant Rights Action Committee, because due to COVID, I had a little bit of more free time since I had to stop working a few months earlier than I was expecting. So I still wanted to get involved with the community, especially before starting law school, since right now I pretty much don't have time for anything else. And so with MIRAC, you know, we did a lot of events throughout the summer in terms of protesting and community events, just to get people involved and hear directly from DACA recipients and hear about their stories and what they want, you know, because this is their fight and their voices are the ones that should be at the forefront. And I should be just, you know, I should be there to respond when the action is needed. But at the end of the day, their voices should come first. And that's what MIRAC is doing, and they continue to do. And so that was what we did a lot in the summer. We also did a DACA renewal clinic, which essentially we filled out people's DACA renewals for free. And we also have a GoFundMe where we provide DACA recipients with a free filing fee, because it's a very expensive process. You know, a lot of DACA recipients have to pay over $1,000 every 2 years to renew their DACA status, and it's obviously very expensive, especially when you consider that we're in the middle of a pandemic that has you know, caused a lot of economic hardships for many families, and a lot of DACA recipients have had to become the providers for their families because, you know, they come from undocumented families, which unfortunately are some of the most vulnerable people during this pandemic. And so a lot of them, you know, it's been a struggle for them. And so this is just a way to continue standing in solidarity with DACA recipients. And so that's something that we did during the summer, and we're hoping to do more. And obviously we help folks if they message us and they need help. We figure out a way to meet up with them and fill out their DACA renewals for free, or provide them with a check for their filing fees. And right now we're currently planning different events to put pressure on Minnesota senators to become the leaders in the Senate to pass the Clean Dream Act. That is essentially our goal. Because right now the bill has been passed in the House of Representatives, but we are just waiting on the leadership in the Senate, which is difficult right now due to, you know, the controlling party in the Senate. So that's why the elections are very important, the elections that are coming up. And so that's a plan that we have right now. We have a protest coming up next Wednesday, actually, outside of Senator Klobuchar's office from 5 to 7 p.m. So if people want to get involved with that, just follow the MIRAC page on Facebook. There's information on that and about upcoming events. So that's the organization I've been really working with right now. Like I said, right now it's kind of hard to do further work as a student, but that's just an organization I think everyone should really follow and get involved with if this is an issue that's very important to you.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm wondering if you want at some point to share the GoFundMe information that you were referencing, if people want to support getting application funds to folks in that process. I think that would be awesome. It's really great to hear about MIRAC and the work that you're doing. I think we might want to link to that as well, so people know how to contribute and support and protest if that's what they can and want to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I can put the information on the comments as well so people can follow.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. Andrew, how about you? What are some of the things you've been up to this summer that you want to share with us, the work with the community and yeah.
Yeah. When I first heard this question, I was like, I didn't do anything this summer, which is actually not at all true. I was very busy this summer. So the work that I do like is closest to my heart is related to tigers, which Susie gave the full acronym earlier. I'll do it again. I love the acronym. So it's Transgender, Intersex, and Gender Expansive Revolutionary Resources and Services, or Tigers with 2 R's. And I'm one of the co-founders. And so we started this organization in January of 2019 because we saw a need of social support in our communities. And so the idea of support groups is really big regarding transgender people overall, because people need support going through transition. And there are many support groups throughout the Twin Cities area, some hosted by the Transmasculine Twin Cities Support Group, and then some hosted by the Minnesota Transgender Health Coalition. But we really saw a need for supporting young people in kind of atypical ways, because oftentimes you get the support at a support group and you go there and you sit down and you're kind of sad and miserable together. And you work through your issues and you grow and you have joy as well. But for us, we really wanted to make sure that there were also social connections happening. And so we host a weekly support group, our weekly social support group, which is really a hangout space for trans, intersex, and gender expansive young people, where they come, they exist in community, they have community healing, and they also have access to all these resources that they might not have otherwise have access to. We do this also by hosting intergenerational community events, which we can no longer do because it's hard to have a beach party when you're in a pandemic, unfortunately, and it's hard to take over the roller gardens when the roller gardens is closed. So it's been a little more rough making sure that all of our people can be as supported as possible during this pandemic. But with regards to Tigers, we've been continuing to support our young people throughout the summer by moving all of our stuff virtually. And I've been doing a lot of work to make sure that all of our young people have the resources that they need. The biggest change with my work regarding this this constitutional decision, or whatever you want to call it, is that it's easier to just say, no, they can't do that. So if your health insurance company is trying to deny you coverage for your hormone therapy, you can say, no, you can't do that. That's healthcare discrimination. And both the state of Minnesota prohibits that with regard to gender identity and gender expression, but also now we have a definition for sex discrimination. They can't do that. The Supreme Court says so. And so with regard to if someone gets fired or aren't getting access to their employee benefits at the moment, you can say, no, they can't do that. And you can give people more resources for how to fight the injustices that they might be experiencing. And so that's work that I want to highlight. And the other work that I want to highlight is the work and the connections we have with other folks leading protests throughout the Twin Cities area. So Tigers actually co-hosted, sponsored a protest of taking back Pride and making sure that Pride can be something that is fully accessed for trans people, for gender expansive, for intersex people, for BIPOC people, because a lot of the spaces in the Twin Cities for LGBTQIA+ people are actually just spaces for cis, white, gay people. And so we really want to highlight spaces that are actually inclusive and welcoming, and make sure that these spaces are successful in giving resources for everyone, and that no one's actually being further marginalized in the space that they're trying to access. And so we worked with a bunch of awesome groups like the Twin Cities Coalition for Justice for Jamar, and the Black Visions Collective, and like Freedom Road Socialist Organization, to make sure that this protest that we were able to sponsor was very successful. And so in that, we've also been highlighting as much work of other organizations, specifically organizations who are at the forefront of the racial justice movement, in making sure that as many people know about the work and that they're doing and participating in that work as possible. So that's kind of what I've been up to.
I love that you began this by saying, oh no, what am I going to say?
Yeah.
That was a lot. Andrew.
It was a lot.
You've been busy.
I have been, and I really have a bad habit of not acknowledging that, but I'm going to acknowledge it.
And I'm kind of super happy that we provided a bit of a platform for you to do that. That was really lovely. Thank you. Sophie, will you tell us what you've been up to and maybe what plans even the Hamlin Reproductive Justice Organization is got going?
Yeah, for sure. And so, I don't know, I also just like wanted to highlight while I was listening to everyone else speak, I was like, oh my gosh, like everyone's doing such like monumental work that just means, and it's just like, you know, very inspiring. And like, for anyone that's like listening, I guess, like, I didn't like start getting involved in this type of work surrounding reproductive healthcare and reproductive justice until like a few months ago. And so like, if anyone's like listening to this and being like, oh, like, that's really cool, but like these people are experts. I'm definitely not. It's just like something I care about, you know? And so like, I don't know. I don't want to like have anyone get dismayed by being like, I don't know where to start. I didn't either. I went to something like this, right? But yeah, so I guess like one of the things that I've been doing a lot this summer is like just learning more about reproductive health care in general, specifically after like this Supreme Court case came out. I was like, okay, like I've had enough of that. Like, let's do what we need to do to make some change. And so one of the things that I really focused on is like learning like more vocabulary and just like baseline knowledge of like what reproductive healthcare is. And so yes, reproductive healthcare is birth control, but it's also abortion. It's also STI prevention and treatment. It's also like contraceptive, like, what's the word? Providing it. Yeah, but you all know what I mean. But anyway, and so like one of the things that I did that I encourage anybody and everybody to do is like just learn the baseline abortion laws within your state. There's a really cool website called Unrestrict Minnesota, where you go on their website and like a little quiz pops up and it's like, do you know the abortion laws in Minnesota? And then like you can go through and then it's like a 10-question quiz. And so that was like quite honestly my first like introduction to that. And so yeah, there's that. And then I've been doing a lot of like, I interned with Planned Parenthood Action Fund, right? And so I've been doing a lot of like phone banking, text banking for like the upcoming election and things like that. And if you are willing and able, I do encourage you to vote. But the other thing that like my org, Hamlin Students for Reproductive Justice, is doing that we're really, really excited about this year is we're really fighting to make emergency contraception more available on campus, because one of the things that we've heard from students is, yes, emergency contraception is available in like the health and counseling office, in the Women's Resource Center, things like that, but like it's only available from this time to this time, this date to this date, in a very public place, where some folks like don't necessarily want to get that in like such of a public venue. And so one of the things that we're really fighting to do, we're still figuring it out, it's still like in the idea stage, is making emergency contraception available in like the vending machines in all of the dorms on campus. And so anyone can access it at any time. It's an over-the-counter medicine, so like it's legal and that sort of thing, as well as making more menstrual hygiene products available, as well as like supplying more dental dams, more condoms, things like that. And yeah, those are the things that we're doing and we're really excited for and are hoping to get going this semester and next semester. So yeah.
I love all those ideas, and I'm really excited to see how you can bring those about. And I, as someone who's working with the Food Resource Center on campus, I would say let's figure out how to. We've shifted recently to getting products that the WRC used to provide when they were able to be open all the time through the Food Resource Center. And so maybe there's a way to connect with you on that as well. We got that. Okay, good. One of the things, one of the reasons we really brought all of you here together today was that one of the things we think about a lot at the Center for Justice and Law is the way in which a lot of these issues are not mutually exclusive from each other, right? The intersections here. And I think all of you have sort of tied to or connected to that in your comments or even in your response to each other, or what people off in Facebook Live land aren't seeing is the way in which like you are all like listening to each other's words so intently, and there's a lot of sort of positive reinforcement and nodding and sort of like, yes, I get that, like I'm experiencing that too. So a question I want to just throw out to whoever wants to answer it, so like I'm not going to call on anybody, but just jump in. Where do you see these intersections for your work with each other? I mean, you know, you've been brought here to sort of think about one of these specific cases, but, you know, obviously you're not just impacted by one of them, right? We're all impacted by all of them. So if you were to sort of just enter into the conversation, sort of thinking through that lens, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Whoever would like to jump in or take a gander. Or I could call on someone.
I mean, like, I have like a small thing. I think something where like Andrew and I's kind of like intersect a little bit is that right, people that need birth control are not all women. People that are women do not all need birth control. Not all, like, right, it's like the whole thing. And so I think that there's like discrimination between both of our cases that kind of have an overlap, and there's also like great monumental moments that like have kind of fixed a problem for both of our situations, right? And so that's just like a very small thing, but yeah.
I think with my issue, they intersect with all of the issues already mentioned, because if, you know, the DACA population is a very diverse population. A lot of times when people think of DACA recipients, they think of just Latinos or, you know, people that look like me or people from Latin America. But in reality, DACA recipients are from all over the world. We have Black DACA recipients, Asian DACA recipients. You know, they're not just from one specific geographical location in this world. And more specifically, DACA recipients that are part of the LGBTQ plus community are more vulnerable than the other DACA recipients, due to the fact that, you know, Latin America, it's a very, and, you know, other parts of the world, it's a very, it can be a very dangerous area for folks from this community. And so a lot of them remaining in the United States is a part of remaining, you know, being alive. It's a part of their livelihoods. It's a part of them being safe. And so that's a way that I see it intersect with Andrew's the various points Andrew has made. You know, that it's, you know, it's a like I said, it's a very diverse population. And then with Anne's, you know, with Anne's different points, we also have to think about how, more specifically when talking about DACA recipients from Latin America, the construction of borders, you know, it's a very debatable topic. And if you've studied at all the history of Latin America, you know that the creation of our borders has shifted over time. Half of the United States used to belong to Mexico. Half of the United States used to belong more specifically to different tribal nations within Mexico. And then we have other indigenous populations within Latin America that historically, you know, thousands of years ago, their ancestors migrated all throughout the lands that we're currently residing on. So we think of the idea of borders as, you know, the sort of, I think a lot of times we think that borders have existed throughout time, but in reality, you know, our ancestors migrated through these lands throughout time. So that complicates the situation even more when you think about how now borders are seen as this sort of place that is supposed to keep people within a certain area. And if you cross these areas, you're somehow illegal or you're doing something that is wrong, but that's not how nature works. And so that's a way that I can connect it to Anne's issue. Then even with the issue of birth control and extending it out to immigrants in general, we saw that immigrants currently held in detention centers, they face a lot of different problems in terms of access to birth control, in terms of access to the decisions they want to make if they enter the United States pregnant. You know, all of these issues are something that are very real to immigrants. And somehow there's this debate within the Constitution when it uses the word "we the people," what does that really mean? And I think that's a debate that the US Supreme Court has had throughout time, which what does that really mean? Does it refer just to US citizens? Does it refer to all people? And I think a lot of times the Supreme Court has ruled that it means all people. We see it in the, for example, the Plyler versus Doe case, which essentially gave access to K through 12 education to all people, regardless of their immigration status, because the US Supreme Court interpreted we the people as meaning all people, not just US citizens. And so that's a way in which, how do these issues apply to immigrants, regardless of their immigration status? Because at the end of the day, we are people, regardless of if we are considered US citizens, which again is a constantly changing notion that is not a part of the natural world.
Yeah, what I'm hearing, and I appreciate that, even that distinction about the natural world, but I mean, what I'm really hearing from you all is that Native justice is Bostock. I mean, these are all coming together. Did anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, so I really appreciate what Kathy said there about the historic migration and economic roots of Indigenous peoples. So in Minnesota, our borders with Canada also split up Anishinaabe peoples. So when that happened, you know, similar to when the Mexican border was negotiated, tribes were not consulted, right? So this, from an intersectional perspective, I guess I'm conflicted, right? Because the reading of the McGirt case is a very conservative, very textualist approach to render this decision. And that same type of approach has been used by other courts to restrict access to things such as the rights to citizenship, to abortion rights, to gay marriage rights. So, you know, a lot of people are, you know, hailing him, Gorsuch, for delivering this decision, you know, as being a supporter of tribal rights. And I think that that's only because of this textualist approach that he brings to the law. You know, he is educated in tribal law, you know, but again, you know, a very textualist, very constitutionalist approach to this decision. So I don't have faith that he's going to, you know, make decisions in the best interests of all peoples from all groups based on the way that he reads and applies the law.
And then one idea I guess I was having as folks were talking about like a world of possibilities that kind of open up, not necessarily about like me being confident that this is something that could happen, because I have, in the nicest possible way, I have very low level confidence in the US government's willingness to prosecute crimes. But thinking about the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, Two-Spirit people, and girls, specifically thinking about like the lens of Two-Spirit people who sometimes identify as members of the LGBTQIA+ community, sometimes do not, up to the individual. Thinking about the ways that if the state of Oklahoma is not willing to prosecute these crimes because for whatever reasons, like the federal government could come in and start working to protect missing and murdered people. I don't necessarily think that they will at this moment in time, but there's a possibility for what the future could be in terms of protecting our people or different people from the crimes that they experience. And so taking away the power from the state of Oklahoma to discriminate, and I guess giving that power to discriminate to the US government, maybe, but also the power to really protect and make people more whole. I don't know. That's what I was just thinking about.
I feel like that's a nice
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, lag here. So no, I too thought about that, Andrew, right? And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought about how the federal government has not held the interests of MMIR, missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, in any regard, right? It wasn't until recently when Deb Haaland was elected that a federal task force was even created. So I don't know that that's a good thing, right? So tribal courts, right, aren't going to have jurisdiction over many of those cases because tribal courts don't have jurisdiction over white people, basically, right? White courts have jurisdiction over Indigenous bodies, but Native courts don't have jurisdiction over non-Indigenous bodies. So there's that aspect just to consider. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, what it was making, I think, sort of where Andrew and you were sort of both going, it brings up the like what can we be doing, right? So part of our conversation. And so again, I'm not going to call on anybody specifically, but if you want to just jump in, but thinking about how folks who are listening in right now, who are, you know, and Sophie, I think you started to address this, but if they are inspired by what you're talking about, or if they're thinking, how can I get involved, or how can I contribute to these issues, these topics, these efforts, the work that you're all doing, and engage with their own communities, but also with your communities and the work that you're doing. So where do you see the opportunities to contribute as collaborators, as allies in the work?
I guess I can go. I think that regarding transgender justice and just queer justice in general, the best thing that everyone can do is really, I don't know. So I'm going to go on a little tangent real quick. I was doing this reading about how the best way to solve problems our communities are experiencing is to stop focusing on individual change and start focusing really on transforming our communities. And so I've been like having this internal war of like, what is the best thing you can do is work to stop gendering the bodies you see on the street, stop assuming people's gender, stop assuming people's pronouns, and making the individual lives of the trans, non-binary, intersex people better, like those individual lives, or working to like transform the way our whole community is set up with regards to gender and sexual identity or sexual orientation. And I don't know. So I'm like, my first thought was like immediately work on being better towards the gender expansive, gender nonconforming, trans, intersex, queer people in your lives or the potential people. But I think more than that too is to support the work that people are doing. You can follow Tigers on Facebook and on Instagram. Something that I'm hoping to do in the month of October for LGBTQI+ History Month is to highlight the work that different people in the Twin Cities community who are trans, gender expansive, and intersex are doing to make LGBTQIA+ history. And in that work is to forward you to their work as well. And so if you follow us on Facebook and Instagram, you can get connected like that. That's a fun plug. And yeah, I think working on transforming the systems that you're in. And so if you are at a company, a corporation, like even if you're not trans or intersex or gender expansive, like look at what the policies are with regards to the treatment of trans folks. And so like, does your company have a policy for if someone transitions? If not, encourage the HR department at that company to create a policy to support people. Like there are stories of people who transition, go to their company's HR department, say, I'm transitioning. This is something that I need you to be doing for me. And they're like, okay, I'll let you know if we have a policy. And they don't. And so they just find a policy that another company has and adopts that. And so I think creating foundational levels to transform individual lives. And so in corporations, in government, elect people who support trans rights. Pretty simple on that regard. And I think a lot of people who are watching this might also be hopefully already planning on doing that. Fingers crossed, for me at least. But yeah, that's, I guess, what I'm mostly thinking and encouraging people to do.
Thank you. I love that. I'm happy to know your org has a social media presence. I'll be looking for that. That's great. Yeah, tigers with 2 R's. Yeah. Okay. How about from the rest of you? This is your chance to call people in and make your plugs for the the local or national work you're doing. Kathy.
Yes. So I guess I like already mentioned it with MIRAC, which and I also put information on the Facebook comments for the people watching. But so that's definitely a way to get involved here in Minnesota. But I know with COVID and, and I hope folks are being cautious with their health and the health of others. There are definitely ways you can get involved virtually. And that includes, just like what Andrew said too, just educating yourself, because I think it's important with DACA recipients from all over the world to understand the histories of their countries, of their home countries, the history of why their families migrated here. Because I think, here in the US, there's the saying that people say all the time, I would kill for my children, I would do these things for my children. And similarly with DACA recipients, these are, parents that were leaving various life-threatening situations, whether it be civil wars, natural disasters, gang violence, all these different things that cause people to migrate. Because, I went to Central America last year, and it's a beautiful place. Like, I would love to live there on a beach house for the rest of my life, because it is so beautiful. So it made me really wonder why people leave such a beautiful country, and similarly with other parts of the world, why are people leaving these beautiful places? So I think educating yourself on the history of these countries is a great way to begin understanding the story, the trauma that DACA recipients are going through. And so that's definitely a way. Also, contacting, your senators, your representatives, and letting them know that you support the Clean Dream Act, that you want them to pass this, whether it be phone call, email, that's a great way to put pressure on them, because we have to hold our elected officials accountable. Fellow MIRAC member, DACA recipient Daisy, always mentions this, that in 2009, when then President Barack Obama had control of Congress, the DREAM Act was not passed. So that's just an example of that, that we have to hold all parties accountable, because sometimes we think that it's a specific party that we have to hold accountable, but in reality, it's all elected officials, regardless of their political affiliation. So that's another way that you can get involved virtually. And as I mentioned too, we have an upcoming protest outside of Senator Klobuchar's office this Wednesday from 5 to 7 p.m. to pressure her to please lead for a Clean Dream Act in the Senate in Washington, D.C. So that's another way. If you're comfortable, going in person, we're trying to make this as socially distanced as possible, taking as much precautions as we're able to ensure that we're still able to take the streets in a safe manner in the midst of a pandemic. So that's another way, if you're local and want to, go out there and just stand in solidarity and just get more involved with the local immigrant community.
Thank you, Kathy, and thanks for giving those more full details about the protest coming up next Wednesday, you said, right? Yeah.
Yes, and also vote.
Right, vote. Yes, absolutely. We're getting a lot of chatter in the comments about yes to voting. I think we've got people participating here who are fully intending, and these are lots of good reminders for why we should. Yeah, Anne or Sophie, did you want to jump in on ways in which people can contribute to the work you're doing or join in those efforts?
I said a little bit earlier, but I can maybe just like repeat it a little bit. But like we all just talked about, voting is a very like monumental piece in fighting for reproductive justice. And so electing officials that want to and fight for reproductive justice is a great way to start. And TBH, a very easy way to start. But I think like another piece of it too is like just reminding yourself that like you can ask questions, and that's one of the best ways to like be involved in this work. And so if there's something that you're curious about, or there's something that you don't know involving any of our cases or any of the issues we've talked about today, like I just so highly encourage you to just pop that into Google, or like talk to anybody that you're like, oh, you might know about this. Do you know where I can go to find more information? I think that's like a really, really easy way to get involved in this kind of work. And then also like supporting each other and like recognizing that all of the issues that we've talked about today like aren't single issues, like because none of us lead single issue lives, right? And so like I think that's really important to acknowledge. And then more of like a fundamental like logistical level thing is doing things like phone banking, is doing things like text banking, is doing things like simply just talking to your friends about, hey, like this issue that I now care a lot about, I want to talk to you about. And I think that that word of mouth and that just like creating more awareness about these issues is the best way that we can all start to get involved.
I have to make a plug for early voting starting tomorrow in Minnesota. If you're in Minnesota, that starts tomorrow, and it's really a nice way to get that done. And yeah, just as a plug there. Anne, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, just to reiterate all the great stuff that people said, vote, vote, vote. To again go off of what Kathy said, learn the history of the place you're at, learn about treaties that apply to the location that you're at. These are not rights that were given to Native people. Native people have their inherent sovereignty that existed long before any Europeans set foot on this continent. These treaties are privileges that were given to white people by American Indian people. So I think that's something to keep in mind, to learn about. More locally here, we have a large homeless population in the Twin Cities metro area now, a large portion of which is an indigenous or do identify as indigenous or native. Give to mutual aid, donate to encampments. Call the city of Minneapolis, call the city of St. Paul, tell them to stop the evictions of the parks, call Governor Walz, call Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, ask them why aren't the pandemic moratoriums being applied to these encampments? There's not any reason why indigenous persons should be homeless on indigenous lands. Yeah, so, you know, and then finally, I guess, more directly to Hamline students, ask your administration, why are they being a proxy for these kidnapped bodies of our ancestors? Why are they keeping them in the basement of a building, you know? If Hamline were to stand up and say, we're not going to hold these bodies anymore, the University of Minnesota would have no choice but to immediately repatriate them. So yeah, just, do something. I don't know. There's lots to do. Just pick one thing.
Yeah, I think just hearing from all of you, we're hearing that there are many ways to get involved, either in your the space you're, spending your time and beyond. So yeah, I appreciate the all of the ways in which you're calling in folks to participate in the work you're doing. It's really really important. We have one question that's come in that I'd like to throw your way, Kathy. Somebody's asking how your position as a law student has affected your perception of the Supreme Court and how you're sort of negotiating or navigating that.
Yeah, that's actually a question I ask myself every day as I read Supreme Court cases in all of my classes. And I wonder how my community is viewed within the lens of the Supreme Court, because the legal field is probably one of the fields that's still very traditional. It's still very underrepresented, especially when we talk about, more specifically my community, the Latinx community. We make up about 8% of US attorneys in the country. So it's, there's still a lot of perspective missing in the legal field. And, the Supreme Court's job is to interpret the way, if something is constitutional, if legislation is constitutional, the way it's applied is constitutional. So I think what I take away mostly is that we need representation in Congress, because we need different perspectives in Congress when it comes time to write laws and pass them, and all of these things that are applied to our country. And of course, we also need representation of the Supreme Court, which of course it's a little more difficult since the Supreme Court justices are on there for life, and it's not as, we don't have much of a chance to really change the representation of it as much as we do in Congress. And obviously for me, when Justice Sonia Sotomayor was appointed to the Supreme Court, it was like life-changing for me, because I was like 9 or something when she was appointed. And I was like, wow, we finally have a Supreme Court justice that looks like me, after, hundreds of years of the Supreme Court. And so obviously, the Supreme Court it's a complicated question, because the Supreme Court is definitely the court that really impacts law, because their interpretation applies to everything and there's no court above them. So whatever they say is the end of, things. So like I said, I just think we need more representation in Congress. We need more attorneys that are diverse, come from diverse backgrounds, not just racial, ethnic diversity, but gender diversity, sexual orientation, the different communities, because they can go to the Supreme Court, and bring in their perspectives. They can go to the lower courts and bring in their perspectives. They can become professors that change the way, that law is taught in these institutions. They have, having more diverse attorneys can have so much power, so much change in this country. And it's just about also providing a pathway for them to enter law school, because entering law school is very difficult in itself. It's very, it's pretty much a competition. It's very expensive. So that's also something that I really see needs to be changed, is the way that folks enter law school, and things like the LSAT and all of these things, these barriers that were placed for us to not enter law school, are things that we should really reconsider and imagine new ways to get more diversity within the legal field.
Yes to all of that. Yes, you're getting a lot of appreciation for that, Kathy, on Facebook. We have a question from Colleen Bell, Hamlin professor who's just recently retired, but still a fierce advocate for all of this work and for all of you. She's asking each of you to think about what are the most troubling misunderstandings or ignorances you encounter as you advocate and work towards social change. So anybody who wants to.
Hi, Colleen. Colleen was my advisor at Hamlin. I miss her so much. Happy retirement, Colleen. But I think this is a really great question, right? I think there's a lot of stereotypes out there about Native people. And we also experience a lot of things at disproportionate levels, right? Unemployment, so much stuff, right? Mental health issues. I mean, the list goes on. But what I think it's important to remember is that one, the 11 tribal nations that occupy this land currently are all sovereign governments. And more than that, they're economic powerhouses, right? On an annual basis, they submit several $billion a year into the local economy. They're among the state's largest employers. Yet our educational system at both K-12 and post-secondary level does not educate people on tribal relations. So people go into their various workplaces and do not know the rights of tribes, treaty rights, or anything like that. So I think that is probably the biggest issue that we're encountering right now. And that really boils down to respecting tribal sovereignty.
Anybody else want to tackle that question from Colleen?
I think this is kind of a universal thing for people who are fighting for any types of justice for a marginalized community. But the idea that equality or equity means you want special treatment instead of equal or equitable treatment, you know? And so you see this a lot with regard to like legislative struggles for trans rights, like banning conversion therapy is not a special treatment. No one should be tortured and put through like mental trauma because of who they are. Like accessing bathrooms equally. I don't want a special bathroom just to myself. I just want to be able to use a bathroom that fits my gender identity without being harmed in the process of it. And like, I don't want like a special driver's license. I don't want special driving privileges. I just want a driver's license that reflects my gender identity because yours gets to reflect your gender identity. And so that like misunderstanding that like all trans people want special treatment when in reality we just want to be like happy, healthy individuals is troubling for me because a lot of the work that I do is just boosting trans people and just queer people in general to make them happy, healthy individuals. And so I wish that just more people got that like, yes, I mean, I also, as a side note, like, I love special treatment. I love it when people love me, when they like say hi to me in the hallways, like wave to me, like that's special. I feel special. Like definitely treat me special. But in terms of my legal access, I definitely just like want us all to be able to access the law in the same way. Like the all men are created equal thing, like it really like both in terms of like the idea of men being created equal and how we all know that that doesn't apply to every single person, but also the idea of equal when we all can't access the law equally. That's something that I'm just like really fired up about. So yeah, I would just love it if we could do that.
All the panelists got a good reaction to special treatment. We all, yeah, right. We like special treatment, but that's not what we're asking for with any of these at all. Absolutely. Well, we're getting closer to the end of our time, and I thought maybe a good question to end with is what is the favorite part of the work you're doing? What brings you joy in this work? What's a high note for you? And I'm gonna put it out there, and one of you can grab it. They're thinking.
I mean, for me, it's also kind of easy is that I get to, every week I get to work with young trans, intersex, gender expansive people, and I get to see them like smile and laugh and have a good time and just joke around and like take a break from sometimes the hell that life is putting them through. And so I get to just have a fun time every week and I get to spend time in joy with community. And so like that's the high point of my work is that we get to have a high point together, and there's definitely low points, but seeing people be happy and healthy and whole people makes me feel more like I am a happy and healthy and whole person. And so I just really love that.
I like that too. I like that your work gives you a chance to create belonging and community. And we know that's so important. Yeah. Anybody else want to connect on that?
I'd love to just like echo what Andrew said. Like, my favorite thing about this work is meeting people and meeting people that care about the same things that I do. It's like the most like energizing thing in the entire world. And Andrew, oh my gosh, okay, right, the last question that you just, I was like screaming in my room. I was like, yes. I was like, yes, Andrew, keep going. Okay, anyway, sorry. But yeah, no, I think it's just like the meeting people. And without this work, I would never have met any of you, right? Without this work, I would never meet the amazing people that I work with every single week. And so like, I think it's that, and remembering that this work really matters. And if it didn't, like, we wouldn't be here. Right. And so like, I think that's like the most energizing part for me, and just continuing to like fight for like what we know is right, and like fighting for our own embodiment, and that the government like doesn't need to have a hand in that. I think that is what keeps me going and just brings me joy.
I do love all your passion and fire, all of you. That's, I mean, a huge part of why we asked you to come, because we know that you have that and bring that. And I suspect that those who are watching feel really excited about what you're doing and inspired by what you're doing. Kathy or Ann, did you want to weigh in on what's your favorite part of this work, or what brings you joy in this work?
Yeah, I can go. So what I love with, with talking with DACA recipients and immigrants in general is to hear their dreams, their goals for the future. You see how much their eyes brighten up, when you ask them, what goals do you have for your future, and not necessarily, big, like, goals that benefit capitalism, because a lot of times it's like, oh, they're going to be doctors, and that's kind of the narrative that goes around with immigrants and with DACA recipients, that, that we want DACA recipients that are, going to accomplish like, 3 PhDs or whatever, like, no, a lot of these folks are artists, are community organizers, they have so many dreams that, not necessarily fit the narrative that is pushed, but their dreams, their goals. I have DACA recipient friends who, want to open bakeries, that want to, sell their artwork, that want to do spoken word, just all this creativity that is within this community that would shine even brighter if they didn't have this, this uncertainty in their immigration status on their weighing them down every day. I just think about the way which our country would be so much better if their goals and visions were brought out in their fullest potential, if we give them a permanent way for them to stay in this country, because there's just so much creativity, so much talent in the immigrant community that I hope, I see in my lifetime shine to its brightest potential.
Thank you, Kathy. I love sort of even just the idea that we suggest that, the folks we're talking about represent so many different awesome possibilities, and not just a single story of their experience. So thank you. Anne, did you want to close us out?
Yeah, and once more, I'm going to go off of what Kathy said, because she says amazing things. For me, I think the biggest thing is systems change, right? I don't do a lot on the individual level, but the work that I do really boils down to making sure that people who want to can access college and can make it through to completion, right? The academy is a very hostile place for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, for first generation students, for low income students. So the work that I'm doing, I often struggle with, right? Higher ed is a colonial institution. It's there to uphold capitalism, to uphold white supremacy. So I often go back and forth with two thoughts. Why do I want to put so many people into a place that has been historically traumatizing, that they've been historically disenfranchised from? But, you know, circling back to what Kathy said, this is, you know, about people's dreams, you know, and in this country, so often in order to make a living wage, you have to be college educated. To be able to go back and make change in our communities, we have to become college educated. If we're not getting BIPOC representation in the classroom, we're not going to be getting BIPOC representation in business, in government, in medicine, anywhere else. And this cycle of exploitative capitalism is just going to continue. So yeah, so that's what I wrestle with, and I don't know that I have the answer, but trying to change that system, as unwieldy as it is at times, is something that I'm very passionate about, and keeps me going.
Thank you. I appreciate all of you so much. I can't tell you how nice it's been to just hear you all have a chance to talk about these things that I know you work tirelessly at. And I give so much to this work because I am so inspired by what you all do daily. And I have been really grateful to be able to work with many of you. And those of you that I don't work with, I hope I get to keep connecting with you. This was a great moment for me to connect with you. And I know that the people who've tuned in agree. In closing, I just want to say to tap into the opportunities mentioned by our panelists for how to engage with a multitude of different issues in Minnesota and beyond as it relates to the Supreme Court cases. Thank you, everybody who tuned in and joined us today on Facebook Live. And please consider joining us in our upcoming events, which will have continuing education credits, including legal education, social work, psychology, and more. You can follow us on our social media accounts and our website to join our mailing list and to stay informed in all things Center for Justice and Law. And finally, if you're looking for a platform to uplift some of the community work that you're doing in regards to public health and justice, and just in case we're not super clear on that, public health is everything, right? We we definitely connect that to just about everything. So if you're wanting to connect with us on those things, reach out to us and we'll find a way to incorporate you into our programming as it continues to unfold this year. And so thank you everybody for joining us, and we will hopefully connect again in the future. Thank you.